1999 or something, 2000 we met.
Yep.
And that was at Ziff Davis TV, ZDTV, Tech TV. But I'll give you a kind of a thumbnail sketch of my career, and then we can go into the whatever you want to talk about in the particular stages. So I went to law school, as many people of my generation did. I went to UC Berkeley Law School and graduated in 2000. And then I worked in law as a litigator, did civil litigation until roughly 1998, almost 1999, in Los Angeles and San Francisco. And I'm currently in Oakland, where I live in the Bay Area. And it was really horrible. It was a horrible time for me, which I can go into in excruciating detail. And I knew really from the first day that I went to law school, the first few minutes of law school, that this was not the right place for me. But there had been so many things that preceded it that it was almost impossible for me to avoid it. I mean, I was very fortunate to get into good law school and all of that, but there was a kind of momentum that surrounded that decision that was more literally sort of more powerful psychologically than I was at the time, and I couldn't do much about it. I had a girlfriend who was going off to USC film school, and I thought, wow, that's a lot more fun sounding, but I felt like I had to do the responsible male thing and be capable of earning a living and all that stuff. So I went to law school and practiced law, and had some interesting experiences as a lawyer, even though most of the time it was pretty miserable. And then in mid to late 98, I quit. I had been weaning myself off of the salary for a period of years, and in the end I was sort of working for myself and a few other lawyers, so I wasn't making the big law firm dollars that I made in the beginning. And then I think I'm trying to remember. It's very hard to remember exactly, but I got some freelance writing jobs for internet publications. I wrote in the very beginning for City Search, of all things. I did restaurant reviews and other things for them, and a number of other websites. So I was creating content for websites back in the time, early days of the internet, when people had budgets for that sort of thing. I wrote an article about all the food at the San Francisco airport for City Search, which no one would ever fund today. Eater or some of these sort of food blogs would do something like that. But and that freelance writing, which I'd been doing since high school, really, I'd been in journalism throughout my school career, enabled me to sort of make the transition into internet startups as a contractor. And I wound up at a place called allbusiness.com, which was an early website for small businesses, intending to give them tools and information to help make better decisions. But this was, again, about all kinds of stuff, incorporating and loans and hiring. And this was really in maybe 2000, 99, maybe it was 99. And my legal background proved instrumental in getting that job, because the guy who started it was a lawyer, and I was able to do a lot of writing about legal issues for small business, and that was very helpful. And I just was exhilarated. Oh, there was a job at Oracle in between. That was 6 months of horribleness at Oracle, and so I repressed it. But basically, at this allbusiness.com site, I was exhilarated to be out of law and earning money as a non-lawyer. There was a lot of pain before I got to that point. And then I was at All Business for maybe a year. The site grew wildly, and I got asked to be part of a TV show called Working the Web at Ziff Davis TV, ZDTV, which became Tech TV, and which has a bunch of the talent that worked there have gone on to do other things, which is kind of interesting. But the show that we ran was called Working the Web. That's where I met Hollis. She was a content provider for the website associated with the show. It was all about giving small businesses advice about e-commerce and websites, and was way, way ahead of its time, because nobody was doing that kind of stuff back in those days for the most part. And then I got recruited to become the managing editor, actually, of the Kelsey Group, which was then a Yellow Pages consultancy focused on small business advertising. I joined them in an operational role and doing sort of in charge of research and editorial. The short version is I was there for 6 years and kind of reached the full extent of what I was capable of doing there, and there really wasn't a lot more opportunity for me. So, and at about that time, 2006, I started getting these sort of inquiries from different internet companies who were interviewing me. I interviewed with Google and a health startup and a couple of other folks, and just nothing was really quite right. But I was ready to leave the Kelsey Group, now called BIA Kelsey. I was there was no, I mean, this is going to sound really kind of hokey and cliche, but I had sort of gone as far as I could go in terms of growth, and there was really no more growth there for me, and there also wasn't more money for me. So I then consulted essentially for 8 years. I mean, I was lucky enough to get an initial consulting gig from Shop Local, which was part of Gannett, and people knew me enough from speaking and writing that they reached out to me for consulting projects around sort of internet marketing, local internet marketing, and I was able amazingly to support myself as a consultant and contractor for about 8 years, and then I developed some relationships with some other entities that help provide some stability. Third Door Media, which runs the SMX conference series and the Search Engine Land and Marketing Land blogs. I've been writing for them for almost a decade, and then I worked with Opus Research, which was a boutique firm, and did a bunch of stuff with them. And then this last August, I got asked by Neg Norton, president of LSA, to step into this new role, as LSA was helping, trying to reinvent itself and move in new directions. And it was appealing to me for many reasons, which I can get into. I had really sort of burned out on consulting and that whole routine. So I'll pause for a breath and a commercial message.
A commercial message. Well, you certainly have taken us around the world. That's great. So the interesting thing is that you just referred to the word reinvent when you were talking about LSA, but not necessarily anywhere in this discourse about yourself. So let's first hear what your definition of reinvention is, because I find it interesting. I think different people have different perceptions and definitions, so I'd love to hear yours.
Well, I'm very sensitive to language, and we could go off on a long discussion about this. But I think I would say reinvention involves some sort of fundamental rethinking of who you are, what you're doing, how you're presenting yourself to the world, how you're packaging yourself, to use that sort of marketing speak. I never really self-consciously did that. I never sought explicitly to reinvent myself. Initially, I was just trying to get the hell out of law, and I was running away from that. And then after that, I had a series of jobs that sort of grew out of each other without any design. I mean, I was so elated to be making money, not as a lawyer, that I didn't really think about formulating a plan or self-consciously reinventing myself. So I just sort of moved from thing to thing, but there's been a kind of coherence about it because it's all been tied in with internet marketing or small business issues, to this day in one form or another.
Right. I mean, I got asked a question because I've reinvented myself multiple times. It sounds like you've just been constantly running away from things. And so how would you answer that question if I pose it to you?
That I've been constantly running away from things?
Yes.
Yeah, so that was largely true for several years after I quit being a lawyer formally. But it stopped being true. It's like you're running to get away from the bad guy, and then at a certain point, once you've done that, you kind of take a breath and slow down and realize you don't have to run so fast. It stopped being true several years ago, I think. And on the subject of reinvention and I think of personas and professional identity and all of that stuff, I'm always sort of amused and amazed by how people see me, right? Because I have, within my little world, I have a relatively high profile, and so people see me as the expert or the guru or the funny guy who can moderate a conference session or whatever. And I'm just always amused by that. And I think about personas and professional identity and how the selves that you present to different audiences quite a bit. And that's somehow tied in with reinvention, I think. What your persona or presentation is.
Okay, so that's a good question to follow up on. you just talked about how you didn't necessarily deliberately reinvent all these times, but do you deliberately recognize and present a persona, and is that part of, as you've changed careers, have you adapted to that and pulled on a new persona?
I reinvent every morning when I get up. Part of my routine. No, in fact, it's the opposite. It's really the opposite. I mean, I think I was most in persona mode when I was a lawyer because I was all infatuated with the sort of fantasy of what that represented and how it would make me appealing or attractive or whatever it happened to be. And I've been trying to become more and more authentic as a person, sort of be less of a, less of a jerk. Not that I was ever a jerk, but just like the business persona to me is just really obnoxious. I mean, it's just sort of the guy who runs around using lots of jargon, hard stop, leverage, all this sort of nonsense that we hear in internet marketing. I'm trying to be a human being in this situation and speak authentically and in my own voice and not be a persona, not have a false front or try and puff myself up or something. And I think that's part of what makes me, to the extent that people find me engaging or entertaining or interesting as a person, I think it's because I do bring more authenticity, for lack of a better word, or more of myself sort of shows up, and that's been true over time. I've been more confident about being myself, whatever that means exactly.
Okay. So
Sorry if I'm not sort of playing into the reinvention theme. It's
no, there isn't anything to play into,
it's uninvention. I'm uninventing myself. Reinventing.
You're retroventing.
Right.
But there was kind of, if not a common theme about running away, there was a couple of times where you, in describing your background, you mentioned the word miserable,
Yes.
or burned out, or
yes,
just
depressed, on the verge of no,
so
chronically depressed.
so and that then led to your decision to leave, and in the earlier part of your career when you were an attorney, maybe you didn't have the same obligations that you now have as a husband, a father, a homeowner, and all the like. But yet you continue to do this. And earlier you said, like even from your early days as a lawyer, you weaned yourself off your salary. So you knew you were going to leave and you planned it.
I tried to plan it. I mean, at a certain point, I mean, it was really it was a pretty desperate struggle for me. I sort of sustained myself with fantasies that I wasn't really a lawyer, that this was just a situation that I had fallen into, and that eventually I would get out of it. But I wasn't confident about that at all. And I probably was depressed clinically at that point. I mean, I didn't do anything self-destructive. I wasn't on meds. But I'd come home and like lie on the floor and stare up at the ceiling. I was working every weekend, and it was not good. And I've lost the question now.
Well, it had to do with planning versus
Planning,
flying
right.
by the seat of your pants.
Right. So I did a little bit of planning. I wasn't smart enough about it. If I had planned from day one, I would have been really smart about my money and not spending money. But because I was in pain, suffering, I blew a lot of money on food, eating out every night, and I didn't buy an expensive car or anything like that. But I bought expensive ties and suits and all the sort of spoils and trappings of the profession. And what happens is that people are making money, they're unhappy, and they reward themselves, or they think, okay, I deserve to spend money on this or that. And then it keeps them dependent upon the income. And had I been really smart, I would have said from day one, okay, here's my financial plan. I'm going to pay off my student loans in this kind of way, and I'm going to put money aside so that I have, kind of a cushion to make the transition. And I remember the hardest thing for me to do was to go to my boss in San Francisco, and I was working for a small firm at that point, and say I didn't want to be a full-time employee. I wanted to be a contractor. That was probably the point at which that was probably the hardest thing for me to do, and it worked out. He was agreeable to that, and then I started working on my own, and then it made it easier for me to transition out, because then I didn't have any commitments to anybody, other than the immediate projects that I was doing. And that actually gave me the confidence. That sort of self-employment period gave me the confidence on some level to do what I did for the last, more or less 8 years. But I sort of planned, but I didn't entirely plan. I wasn't, really calculated or super smart about it. I would have saved a lot more money, not bought as many meals out or suits or ties that I never wear, that sort of thing.
So, but still, I mean, you described your depression as kind of forcing your hand. You as an act of desperation, you had to get out. But on the other hand, I think that there are a lot of people who are clinically depressed who just stay the course, and for whatever reason they tolerate it being miserable. And so I would ask then, what's the difference between one's tolerance for misery versus one's tolerance for risk? Because leaving a job and recreating yourself is also risky.
Yes, and I think tolerance for risk, willingness to take chances, is a big part of this. And you gain confidence in doing that over time. And people who go to law school are pretty risk adverse. I mean, the reason you go to law school is for the economic. At one point you went to law school because it was something that your parents wanted you to do, and it was would make a good living, and you could. The theory was you could do anything with a law degree, which of course isn't true. So it was all about security and all about risk adversity, and I had to learn how to sort of take risks, and that happened incrementally. I wouldn't, I think there's a kind of a paradox. So people who are really kind of desperate, I wouldn't ever say that I was desperate, because I was pretty comfortable and pretty lucky to have the situation that I had from one point of view. But people who are really in a bad place, the bottom, whatever that is, can sometimes make a break, can sometimes take some radical action and change. Sometimes those people can't, because they're just so disempowered. They're so sort of, just too much weight, for lack of a better way to put it. And I think in order to take risks, you have to have some sense of hope or possibility. You have to have some sense, somebody around you that's reflecting back to you, yes, it's possible for you to do what you want to do, or other people have done it, some model out there, whether it's a mentor or an individual in your life, or some example that you can look to. And there's a movie called The Edge. It's written by David Mamet. It's a Alec Baldwin, Anthony Hopkins movie. Probably came out in the 80s or 90s, probably a 90s movie. It's actually kind of a good thriller. And there's a line in that movie called that Anthony Hopkins repeats: what one man can do, another can do. And that became kind of a joke between a friend and I, but it's a kind of a mantra in a way. If you've seen somebody do something in the world, you can do it, right? It doesn't matter if that person is somehow privileged or in very different circumstances. It suggests that it's possible. So you have to have some sense of hope and possibility in order to reinvent yourself, or take the risks that are necessary to do that, or be forced into it. It's always amazing to hear these stories about kids who are in these terrible situations, and somebody goes up and gets accepted to every Ivy League school and goes on and becomes some great accomplished person, and then many other people don't escape that, right? What is the difference between that person and the other person when the circumstances may have been similar? It's some sort of very intangible thing, or some moment of inspiration, or some vision, or something, and it helps to have supportive people around you. And I'm talking too long. Rah, rah, rah.
No,
back to you, Alice.
I'm not giving you the cue yet.
Okay.
But I liked what you just said to answer my question, which was that you had to learn how to take risk, and you entered into a risk adverse field, and that you did it incrementally. So can we go back to that and you explain it a little bit more specifically? Like, what do you think led to this? I've been told that one's ability to tolerate risk is sort of not necessarily a learned behavior. So talk about that.
I would agree. I mean, I think humans are conditioned for survival and security and comfort, and exposing yourself to risk or discomfort or stepping outside your comfort zone is not a natural thing for most people. Some people, but not most people. I did a lot of things. I did see a therapist for a while during this period when I was really having trouble. And, there are a lot of terrible therapists and coaches out there, and I was fortunate to to have somebody who's very helpful and help me address some of the underlying psychological issues that were holding me back. And so that was very much, very instrumental in the process that I was going through, which unfolded over, basically 9 or 10 years, if you count law school. And I had people around me who weren't lawyers, who weren't telling me I was stupid or who weren't reinforcing my passivity. The people you surround yourself with are very important. People can be very threatened by somebody who's trying to make change in their lives because they may not be willing to do that, and they may sabotage you. But if you are surrounded by people who really are supportive and interested in your well-being and can see your vision and so on and so forth, that's invaluable and even essential. And I would say that I had a lot of, not a lot of friends, but I had a number of good friends in Los Angeles at the time who were living very, very different lives than I was. And it showed me alternative visions and possibilities. And that was also quite helpful. And I talked everybody's ear off. People were sick of hearing me talk like, yeah, right. Sarcasm. People were just tired of me droning on and on and on about my frustrations and my fears and my doubt and, all of that.
So they kind of talked you through it. And that also brings up another point about the support that one gets or not during reinvention. And I was hoping that you could give some specifics about that. So you did mention some of that. Do you think that you could have reinvented yourself, especially initially, but all these many times without support?
No. Mm-mm. I mean, nobody does anything without support. I mean, you regardless of whether it's a work project or a creative project or there are always other people. Either they're around you and you're interacting with them. So they're either actively supporting you or they're not supporting you or undermining you, whatever. I would say that so my wife was also very important in this process. So we started dating and we moved in together before we got married, and we lived together for about 4 years before we got married, which was a big problem for her, but not as much for me. But that's another story. But anyway, so she had a very stable job that she liked, and she wasn't in the sort of suffering mode that I was in. And she her stability and the fact that we lived in a rent controlled apartment in San Francisco, we didn't have kids. At the time we moved into this apartment, we were paying something like $1,100 a month or something like that. It was like a 2-bedroom apartment. That apartment today would cost you like $4,000, $4,500. Remarkably, we were in that apartment for like 9 years, and the rent control was just instrumental. And so she had this stable job, and it enabled me to make less and less money over time. And then at some point, just to say, okay, I'm gonna, the economy was really good in '98. I'm gonna go out and see if I can do something else. I should say that when I moved from Los Angeles, I went to Berkeley. I moved back down to LA, where I'm from, and then I worked in this big firm, which was just hellish. And I knew I didn't want to be in LA. I wanted to be back in Northern California. So I made that. That's part of the story. So I made that change, and I'd saved some money to do that. And then I got up to Northern California, and I tried like my best to get non-law jobs, like NOLA Press, law-related jobs. Nobody would hire me, so I had to get a law job, and I finally did. I exhausted my money. But my wife and that whole rent-controlled apartment situation was really very helpful because money is a factor. I had student loans, and there was a lot of fear around money at the time. We didn't have any kids. So, support was critical. And it was, in fact, a friend who challenged me in the end in about 98, who challenged me to quit. This was one of the people I've been talking to for years, a friend from college. And he said, you've been, saying this kind of stuff for years. Now, why don't you do something about it? He didn't say it in those blunt terms, right, but he essentially challenged and encouraged me. He said, look around you, the economy, there's all this internet stuff, et cetera, et cetera. And I realized he was right, but there had been a lot of stuff that preceded that, and people and my wife and the apartment. And it wasn't just like one guy saying, but it was the cumulative, experience of all these things that enabled me finally to say, okay, I'm gonna quit. And, interesting, I told you I worked at Oracle, which was also not a good situation, but nonetheless, it was my first job, not a law job. So I was so scared to stop doing law because that's what I knew how to do. That's what I'd made money. doing. And so I stopped. I just stopped. I did my last project, no more projects. And then like I had a panic attack. Like, where's the money going to come from? Oh my God. And right after that, I got this call from somebody at Oracle. And I had taken a copy editing class months and months before through an organization in San Francisco, consistent with my writing interest. And somebody from there had heard that I was a lawyer and told her boss, and the boss called me, and it was like 6 months before. And this was like the universe intervening, you know, okay, you can't deal with the anxiety of just being out there, so we're going to come in and give you this easy way out. And it was great that to have that opportunity. It turned out to be miserable. The guy I worked for was just, you know, defamation. That's what I would say. Just terrible stuff. Now, I'm defaming him rather than saying all these specific things about him. I'm saying defamation. But, you know, it was a whole slew of things. It was a long incremental process. But that was the big one for me. I mean, if I do nothing that I'm really proud of in my life, you know, my kids are wonderful and I'm very proud of them, and I love my wife and all that. But if I do nothing else, being able to get out of that gravitational force of that job is just a major accomplishment given my family history and my psychology and everything.
Right. So you know, finally you took a friend of yours to challenge you, but you looked for jobs and didn't really find anything at first, so you ended up taking another law job, and eventually you did leave, but you found another job because of a course that you elected personally to take because of an interest you had in writing. And I feel like you just glossed over that, but that's actually pretty important. So
well, yeah. What was that?
Why did you, first of all, you know,
can I have another glass of wine?
Here you go. Why did you take that writing class? What was your interest? Was writing a passion, and did you decide to pursue it?
Yeah, no, I had, as I said, I think a while ago, I wrote in high school on the school paper, and in college I wrote for the paper, and in law school I did some writing that was sort of extracurricular and some creative stuff. So that had been part of my whole, you know, sense of self and identity, and I enjoyed doing it. And I actually had done I did a freelance writing gig in the very end. I had forgotten to mention this. So at the very end, when I was kind of weaning myself off of the legal stuff, I had this sort of sidelight freelance writing thing for a small print publication in the Bay Area. And I didn't make any money doing it, but I just did it because I enjoyed it. And it got me into a different sort of environment from what I was doing. And I took this copy editing class because I thought, well, it would be valuable for me to have these skills. And it was just really like a few sessions. It wasn't like a lengthy thing. And so how I would interpret that is putting myself in situations where I was interested in the subject matter was useful and instrumental in retrospect in getting me these opportunities. So I didn't have some scheme like, oh, I'm going to be in this class and this class is going to lead to this other thing. It was like, okay, this is who I am. I want to improve my skills in this area. I went into the class and somebody responded to me, and then I got this opportunity, which again was horrible. But then, you know, it was a stepping stone. Right. It's definitely a stepping stone.
Right. And actually, even if you didn't necessarily intend or know that you would be in a class with somebody who would know your name and know your background, or frankly, who knew what skills you had as a copy editor before that, the point was that you placed yourself in that circumstance deliberately. And, you know, whether or not you were doing it because it was a passion or because you did want to pursue a career or have some sort of additional skill for the next career because you knew you were going to move on to something, you know, you took that step. So I want to talk about the factor of acquired skills and transferable skills as one reinvents in a career. You know, you weren't happy in the law, but that was a big skill of yours. So what would you
it definitely helped me. The legal, there was definitely value to that. I mean, I have skills today as a result of being a lawyer, so it wasn't entirely a waste of time. But but I mean, I honed some writing skills and argumentation, blah blah blah, all the stuff that people say, and interviewing. I did a lot of depositions and I did court appearances. So today I get up in front of people and talk at conferences. and I do interviews, where you are. I moderate sessions, and some of that stuff is comes out of those legal experiences where I was doing depositions, or where I was doing court appearances, and I gained confidence and I gained those skills. But that was a secondary kind of thing that came to me as a result of that.
Right. But still, did you ever do any kind of skill analysis when you were looking to move on to the next thing? Or were you just so darn lucky each time that you were miserable and left your bad circumstance, or you weren't totally miserable, but you had reached the cap, you were going no further? Did you ever do a skills assessment or something like that kind of exercise to say, I do this stuff and I still like to do this part of that stuff, and so I can find something else using this stuff that I am still good at?
Well, at one point I did make a pact with Satan, and that was very helpful along the way. I'm still paying for that, of course. No, what? I never did a formal skills assessment, like take a piece of lined paper and draw a line down the middle and that sort of thing. I was constantly sort of assessing my skills in my mind as I thought about, well, what can I do that would enable me to sort of change and move in this other direction. I was doing some of that as a tactical matter. I didn't do anything formal. But I was always trying to think about, well, what do I really want? What is really going to be interesting to me? If I have to sort of point myself in a direction, how am I going to do that? And I didn't entirely do that successfully, but those were the sort of the two things I was always thinking about. Well, I can write. Well, I can do this. Well, I can do this. And so, and then I did, actually, I was quite inspired by. Now I'm going to forget it. I'm going to forget the name of it. It was a very popular book about creativity, based on a 12-step program, really popular a while ago, and they had groups all over the country. You know the book, by a woman who was a kind of a failed actress, Hollywood person. Wow, somebody on this call, I'm sure, knows it. Shout it out if you do. It's a book about. This is incredible. I can't remember it. It was a trade paperback, and there were several of them, and it was a bestseller, and it was really a hot book for a while about.
But what's the point?
Rediscovering your creativity. It was about trying to get into some deeper sense of like, what am I really about? What is my life really about? So this is not a skills assessment exactly, but it was trying to think about, where do I want to go? What's going to make me happy? And I was always thinking about those issues.
And then another thing I thought that, and you mentioned earlier, that you sort of entered the internet age as a contractor.
Mm-hmm.
And what was that experience like? Not from like literally was it great or terrible, but would you advise other people to seek that kind of entry into a next thing as a lead-in or a test, or if they really are not sure if they're prepared, or that that changes for them?
Absolutely. I mean, it goes to your situation in life and your ability to take risks. I mean, people hire you or promote you because they like you as much as for what you can do, right? So you need to bring some combination of skills and capabilities and personality, and that's hopefully not a false thing. But getting into an environment that you want to be in, and then being able to demonstrate that you can do what it is you're being asked to do, is a path to full-time employment. And many companies now will only, test people out. They test drive people in these contractor roles. They're not going to bring on full-time equivalents because it's just financially risky. The economy has changed, and so you may be forced into that situation. But it is a good idea. I mean, you have to test things out. You have to put yourself out. Put yourself out there. I mean, again and again, and that lesson is reaffirmed for me. Going out, meeting people, having experiences, getting myself in the situation has been helpful. Not always successful, but very helpful.
Greg, would you define yourself as an extrovert or an introvert?
I knew this was coming. Because I almost preemptively characterized myself. Well, it's funny because I had somebody call me an introvert the other day, which I was really surprised by. But there are ways in which I am sort of introverted. I mean, I'm whatever the hybrid is. I mean, I like talking to people and being around people, but I often will prefer to, I like going to movies by myself. And, I like being alone and going to the gym alone. And, I was afraid to live alone and travel alone, and now, I don't live alone now, but once I got through that, I mean, I really liked it, and I like traveling by myself most of the time, not always. So sometimes I am a bit of an introvert, and I don't, it's harder and harder for me to like put myself in these social schmoozing situations. I have less and less patience for the hey, how you doing? Blah blah blah. What do you do? Kind of stuff. But one has to do that. There's a certain amount of that one has to do. So I guess that goes to being a bit of an introvert.
Yeah, and also the ability of someone to put themselves out there. And I asked the question because when somebody's an extrovert, it's not so hard for them to put themselves out there. But when someone's an introvert, it's excruciatingly painful. So it's interesting to hear that you're a hybrid, and that yet you recognize that you had to force yourself to do that.
I would never have, who said this to me, made me really think about it. And I think, yeah, there's truth there. There's a lot of stuff there that is maybe more introverted than I would have admitted.
So what's been the most rewarding part about this sort of perpetual reinvention process of yours?
What's been the most rewarding part? Well, I mean, over time, I've been able to make more money, which is really good in this world that we live in that's so involved with money. So moving between jobs can, unfortunately, sometimes people move down in terms of compensation, but it's often the case that being at a job over the long term and waiting for promotions is sometimes not a good way to advance yourself financially, and you have to change jobs, unfortunately, in some cases. But I would say this is going to sound again sort of like a goofy cliche. One of the themes, as I look back on it, that's been true is that I have, when I have kind of plateaued in terms of my growth or challenges that I've been confronted with, then I tend to get bored, and that's when I have moved on. And so I guess the opportunity to sort of, I'm going to be like Mr. Career cliche if I go too deeply into this. I think meeting some of the people that I've met in some of these jobs and having new, taking chances and doing things and, planning events and having them succeed and getting up and giving a presentation and having that, be well received and those kinds of things, sort of moving slightly beyond what I'm comfortable doing and having reinforcement of those things. Those kinds of things have been very rewarding. New experiences, but it's mostly about people. It's mostly about my interactions with other people. Sometimes I'll write something and I'll think, wow, that's impressive. No, I mean, sometimes I'll create a piece of work and I'll think, oh, this is good. This is a good piece of work. This is a report or slide deck or something I did. And, I like it, but it's really mostly about other people and my interactions with them, which have been most satisfying to me.
And so what's been the most challenging part of all this?
Well, sort of maintaining my enthusiasm in a way. I've been doing a version of what I'm doing now, which is focused on internet marketing and technology and just sort of maintaining my enthusiasm for that. As I get older and I start to think about, a lot of the horrible things that are going on in the world, and I think about my kids and I think about death, mortality, and all these things, it makes me think, well, social media marketing and SEO. Part of me thinks, well, these are sort of ridiculous propositions. I mean, they really matter to the businesses, but in the scheme of things, like the girl Malala, the Pakistani girl who got shot in the head in the face because she was advocating on behalf of girls' education. Now, this is something that's really valiant, heroic that she's doing, and it really is powerful. And so I think about those kinds of things, and sometimes I judge myself and think, what I'm doing is not very meaningful. It is in some ways, but so it's just maintaining my enthusiasm for what I'm doing has become challenging for me at times. But again, I feed off of people, and so when I'm in situations where people are really excited and doing interesting things, then that's good for me.
I want to, we have not too much time before Q&A, so I want to ask you about failure. first of all, is failure or the proposition of failure a necessary evil to embrace when somebody undergoes or considers undergoing reinvention? And how do you prepare for that?
I think it's very hard to prepare for failure. I mean, some people will say, well, what's the worst thing that could happen? And sort of visualize the failure and then sort of move beyond it, realize you're going to survive. I think you have to experience setbacks and failure. And I think that's the way you prepare for it, is that you experience them, hopefully at a relatively early age, and you move on and you go and you have other successes, and you realize, okay, there are always going to be setbacks, but there are also successes, and setbacks in some ways can be very educational and instrumental in future success and growth. And so I wouldn't say that there's, at least in my life, there hasn't been some formal preparation for failure. You do have to be willing to expose yourself to no, or that's not very good, or I'm sorry, in order to get to where you want to go.
Mm-hmm.
But I think just living through those setbacks is really the thing that you need to do, and hopefully you can do and build up confidence over time. People who get fired, or people who don't get jobs and then go on to get other jobs, realize, okay, I didn't get that job, but there are other jobs out there. Or I was rejected in a relationship, but now I'm with somebody else and I'm happy. This is the, human life is about imperfection and mistakes, and that's just all part of it. And so living through that, I think, is the way you prepare for it in the future.
Do you think that reinvention is for everyone, and why or why not?
Of course it's for everyone. Send your checks in now. Operators are standing by.
There's that toll-free number.
Yeah. Well, again, that begs the question of reinvention. I think, people have a fantasy that they're going to sort of set up a cocoon of security for themselves, and things are then just go on cruise control, to mix metaphors. And really the reality is that life is very dynamic, and there's always change, always. Whether you covet it, seek it,
Yep.
It's always happening. It's going to be foisted upon you simply because you're aging and the earth is turning, or you can actively seek it out. And I think in that sense, reinvention, as you may define it, is inevitable. The only question really is whether you recognize that and try to embrace it as much as you can, or you try and run from it, or try and devote a lot of energy to avoiding it. And it's the degree of reinvention, I think, that's the issue here. Am I moving from being a lawyer to a personal trainer or actor, or am I moving from being a lawyer to somebody who does writing about legal issues? And that's a much less dramatic reinvention.
And I know that you picked the personal trainer route, Greg.
That's right.
Right.
I actually used to be a woman, and so that was the most profound reinvention that happened.
Okay, let's not joke about this. Is there any specific action suggestions that people could take away from this that you'd have to recommend to them right now?
Well, I mean, if you're an adult, if you're somebody who has financial obligations, then you really have to do a lot of planning around money, and that's a fundamental practical thing. You have to think about your expenses and your debts and family, and you have to sort of really that has to be focused on. It shouldn't be the only consideration, because you can really make that an excuse for not taking action, unless you're forced into it. So money is a consideration. I mean, as you mentioned, sort of some of the exercises that people can do to think about other careers. I don't have any formal training in this, so in a way I feel unable to give a lot of formal advice, tactical advice. I think you have to talk to people a lot. You have to find people who really support you, and you also have to think, where do I want to go? Visualizing where you want to be, thinking very concretely about where you want to go as much as you can is really important. Goal setting, as much of it as a cliche as it may be, is important. You got to, I want to be this, and I want to be there in such and such a time frame. You may not get there, it may not happen, but if you have a concrete plan, there's the story of the FedEx founder who did something similar to this and then realized, founded FedEx. Anybody who has a clear vision of what they want to do is going to be in a better and a stronger position than somebody who's just sort of, well, I don't know, I haven't really thought about it. And I'm sympathetic to that.
I just don't like what I'm doing right now.
Right, and as you get older, it's harder and harder to get in touch with what is it that you want to do, because you're weighted down by all these practical considerations. Well, I have these obligations, and you're out of touch with whatever internal voice is sort of guiding you. Kids are very clear. Mm-hmm. They are very passionate. They have very clear ideas. And then that gets murky over time as we sort of internalize other people's opinions of what we should be doing and our own doubts. And, you really have to, hearing yourself is also important. What am I saying to myself about what's possible? Internal voices, is that your father's critical voice? Is that the voice of fear? There are lots of different voices in people's heads, and you have to really move toward this is possible, the yes,
Yep.
I used to say I'm a person who says yes, but, and I'd like to become a person who just says yes.
Yeah. There's a really great book that I read called, I think it's called The Power of Positive Thought, but it's by Mary Lore, Lore. And she has all those kinds of exercises, replace but with and, right. Eliminating self-limiting thinking. Human beings have 60,000 thoughts a day. It's just exactly. A lot of chatter. Shut it down.
Exactly. Yeah. Whatever works. Whatever works. Meditation, exercise, talking to a friend, drinking rosé on Thursday afternoon, even though it's Wednesday. Whatever is going to work for you. However outlandish. Going up to Esalen and taking sitting in a hot tub for 48 hours, or jumping out of a plane. I've done that. All of that stuff, whatever is going to help you move toward that place of greater satisfaction, doing what you want to do. I mean, also some people meditate on death. You're going to die. You only have a limited amount of time.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, one exercise that I wanted to do that I've never done because it's just too weird is write my obituary as though I had accomplished what it was that I wanted to do in my life. If all my fantasies of my own life had come true, what would that look like from the standpoint of an obituary? And write that down. And I think about all of that, and it weirds me out, so I don't, And
I did that one, and I failed royally. I wanted grandkids, and I don't even have kids. So I'm going to move us to Q&A, and I do want to ask Greg that I think we may have more questions than your verbosity and the amount.
I'll answer. This is what I tell people in panels when we get to the end. Twitter size responses. So I'll answer in 140 characters.
Oh, okay. Either that, or is it okay if we email you the questions that we might not get to, and then we respond, and I can send them out to the.
No.
Okay. Well.
Yes, of course it is.
Okay. So I'm going to start with some of the questions that were submitted during registration, because they were first. What are the pros and cons of independent consulting versus being on someone's payroll?
Pros, control over your time, control over projects that you take. You can say no to people. Flexibility is the best thing. Sometimes you have the capacity to make a lot more money than as a full-time employee, depending upon what you're doing. The cons are working all the time, hustling for projects, doing the project, chasing down the billing unless you have support. So just the one woman, one man band aspect of it, and having to the uncertainty, not knowing when the next project is coming down. So there's a lot of uncertainty sometimes. So it's again sort of freedom versus security, in a certain way.
Mm-hmm. What's your definition of success?
There's a cultural definition of success, which is tied into all these sort of external trappings of success. And then there's sort of a personal definition, which would be, did you accomplish what you set out to accomplish? How do you feel about what you did? I don't think there's a single definition. I mean, the simple answer would be, do I have a nice house? Do I have the things that you're supposed to have? But I think it's really all about what you feel about what you're doing, and whether you feel like you're doing something that you care about and is meaningful, and you're doing a good job. The sense of integrity about your work. I think those are hallmarks of success.
So is it a fair follow-up to ask if you feel successful in that condition?
Well, it's interesting. I am successful in a lot of ways, but I don't always feel successful, and that goes back to the point I was making about the larger world and some of the things going on, and spending a lot of time writing about who will win, Google or Facebook or Yahoo. I get bored with that sometimes.
Hence why I call myself a reformed marketer. Do you consider yourself an entrepreneur?
That's a hard one. I did try and do a startup. We didn't talk about this, and I'm springing it on you at the last minute. I did try and do a startup, which I did not succeed in raising money for. So I guess I am sort of entrepreneurial, but I have, yes, I'm an entrepreneur in the sense that I've been able to be this consultant, I suppose, and make that work. But I'm not like a typical entrepreneur, because I have this whole security issue background. Easier to take.
I'll follow up that
Yeah.
with my own question. And do you think that anybody can be an entrepreneur?
Well, what's an entrepreneur? People have different temperaments. Extrovert, introvert. What you got to find the right fit. What do you want to do? Do you want to focus on some task and do that and go home? Do you want to be working all the time, but you own what you create? I think it goes to personality, and everybody wants to make money. Everybody wants all the things that the culture says, but I think it's really about understanding who you are and finding the right fit, finding the right situation. Lots more people can be entrepreneurs than are entrepreneurs, but not everybody can be.
Aha. So was the book that you were trying to recall the name of called The Artist Way?
Yes, exactly. Thank you.
Aha. All right. Well, we have answered that question. And
thank you.
Look, we have a final question. What do you really want to do? Are you living your dream right now? And if not, why? I think you might have answered that a little bit.
I want the name of that person. No. Living my dream. To be totally honest, I would say I am not living my dream. But I am very fortunate and grateful for my situation and what the things that I've been able to do and the opportunities that I've had. And so I complain and all of that, but I'm pretty happy, and I'm working with some really great people now, and I'm happy to be where I am. And I don't know what the future holds. I'm not unhappy. I suppose my dream would be to find a way to make some enormous amount of money and do some social good. And then, this is my dream, okay? My dream would be, but it would probably be corrupted by the real experience, to have someone, to be Bill Gates as he is today, right? So the philanthropist, right? Give money to people. But that's a highly problematic situation, because then people come to you and they want money, and it distorts your relationships. But I would love to give money to people who I would love to help people make transitions in their life. Give them, here's $100,000, take a year off, go do what you want to do. I would love to be able to do that. That would be a fantasy.
Hey, I got a job for you. Talk to me after the program.
I don't have that money. I don't have the money to do that. I have a family. I have kids about to go to college. What can I say? I'm trapped.
Hey, guess what? I think if you really want out, you'll find another way.
No. Don't hear that, because I'm not saying I'm. Do you have another question? We still have a little bit of time.
No.
No more questions. No more questions.
Just the wrap up, and we have 3 minutes, so you're allowed to talk for 1.5 of them.
Well, okay. So here's an interesting thing. I always had this fantasy of being like a columnist, somebody who wrote opinion pieces, and being able to just have the freedom to say what I wanted about things that were important to me.
Bob Garfield?
No.
Oh.
Not Bob, definitely not Bob Garfield. Oh my God. No.
For those who don't know who Bob Garfield is, he writes about media, marketing, and advertising.
No, so I never became a columnist, but I did a lot of writing, and I write every single day. I'm generating a huge amount of writing, but I do express my opinions in most of what I write. I have the great luxury of being able to write my opinions and have people, take them seriously. And that really is, it's like I did wind up in a certain way doing one of the things that I wanted to do. It's not
Yes, you did.
exactly what I envisioned, but more or less it is. And that kind of thing has happened to me throughout my life. And part of it has been about moving toward things that I like to do. And part of it is about having some sense of where I want to go, even if I don't get exactly to that place.
Excellent. Those were the 2 specific action steps we were looking for earlier, dude. All right, listen, everybody.
I am freezing. I'm telling you,
Oh, see,
I'm outside.
Conversations from the front porch with mittens.
Yes.
Everybody, if you could look down at the bottom of your toolbar there, you'll see something that says polls, I believe. I would like to have you answer this question, which is really, does this time of day, which is 8:30 p.m. Eastern time, work for you? Or would you like to see it at a different time? I would love to have your answer on that poll before you sign off. And I'm going to give you a minute to answer that. It's just a one selection answer. I'm also going to flip over to my screen so I can tell you a little bit about what's coming up next. And let me see if it lets me do that. Here we go. And I think you should see it. Greg, can you see my screen?
I can.
Okay, so coming up next, this is Greg's contact information, everybody. He's on Twitter at @gsterling. He has his own blog called Screenworks with it.
No S. No S.
Oh, Screenwork?
Correct.
So sorry.
Okay.
For our future webcasts, please visit reinventionworks.com/webcasts. We're going to be posting up all of the future guest speakers. We already have lined up next Wednesday, Saul Kaplan. He owns a company called the Business Innovation Project. So it's his business to innovate. And he is a multi-time reinventor. So he's a really interesting fella. And another future guest is Rob Spider-Graham, who's a trainer and has also worked in the industry that Greg and I have worked in. So please join us again. Obviously, if you've been here before, some of the content it goes wherever it may. And just because folks, I'm familiar with the folks, it doesn't mean that the conversations are the same. And even if you're not interested in the person or the subject matter, again, please tell friends of yours who might, because as we all know, everybody's always reinventing somewhere in this world. I'd love to get your feedback by email. You can send it to me at webcasts@reinventionworks.com. Or you can use the hashtag #reinventionworks on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @reinventionwork, no S, because it exceeds the 16-character maximum on Twitter. So I think that's a wrap, everybody. I really appreciate you coming out. Greg, thank you. You've been fantastic. I loved having you as my second guest. And let's do this again sometime with real wine, okay?
Yeah. Thank you. And thanks for listening, everybody.
All right. Bye now.